I'm pleased to say a few words about this important legislation, and this legislation is I don't want to use the word, but it's almost unprecedented in this chamber. The power that it is providing to the executive, and to use Mr. Mellam's term, the Gang of Eight, as Mr. Mellam referred to the 8 ministers in charge of the government at this moment, is significant. It is a concern, and it must be scrutinised adequately. I think it's most regrettable that the chamber voted against Dr. Ratman's motion for an oversight committee. I can't believe that 3 independent, so-called independent members of this place would vote against such a motion, and I don't frankly know how they can, how they can live with themselves and their duty as a member of this place to scrutinise the executive and vote against such a motion. I would call on all members to support Mr. Davis's motion for a non-government majority subcommittee of PAAC with the power to report directly to the chamber rather than having to go through the usual process of the full committee adopting a subcommittee report. It's important that a non-government majority be able to report to this House, and a non-government majority reporting directly to this House, scrutinising these extraordinary powers and the tens of billions of dollars that are proposed to be spent with these powers must be scrutinised. Now, it's important, and I thank Ms Crozier for highlighting this to me. In the Commonwealth, there is a Senate Select Committee on COVID-19, chaired by Labor Senator Katie Gallagher, with a non-government majority. In New South Wales, a non-government majority chaired by David Shoebridge of the Greens, Deputy Chair Robert Borsak of the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party. They're similar in New Zealand. It shouldn't need explaining. It shouldn't need explaining that when the Victorian community is looking to the government to do the right thing, that there needs to be some check and balance and accountability on these extraordinary powers that this bill is going to provide to the government. And you can hear from the contributions around the chamber, there's a degree of goodwill towards the government to respond to the situation at hand. But that doesn't mean a carte blanche. It doesn't mean we all pack up and go home and come back when this is over. It means that we wish this to be dealt with in the best possible way, and for that to be achieved, scrutiny must be part of that. So, given the decision of the chamber to vote down the committee as proposed by Dr. Ratman, I would urge members to support the motion by Mr. Davis to allow the Public Accounts and Estimates Committee with a subcommittee non-government majority to do this important work. And for Mr. Mellam to say it's all the same, it doesn't matter whether it's government majority or not, nonsense. Nonsense. Absolute bunkum and nonsense. We know the dynamic is different. We know the questions are harder. We know the probing is more when it is a non-government majority. Fact. So let's dispense with that, quite frankly, ridiculous argument, and I implore all members to support Mr. Davis's motion, amendments. Now, President, like other members, I'd like to, particularly as Mr. Limbrick said, I am very concerned about loneliness, isolation, people who are struggling in this time. I think of my personal friends, but also my constituents who have mortgaged their homes for their small businesses, and the viability of those small businesses and their homes is subject to the whim of, and I don't say that disrespectfully, but the whim of government regulation, whether their businesses survive, whether they can trade, whether they can open. I don't second guess the reasons why those rules are made, but I think I'm very concerned for the well-being of so many in our community as part of the effort to stop the spread of the coronavirus, who have been so adversely affected, and whenever it is safe to do so, regulation must be lifted. We are legislating for a 6-month period. If let's hope everything continues to go in the way it is. If this 6-month period is not needed, I would implore the government to not use these powers unless absolutely necessary. Mr Davis covered some significant parts of the bill, particularly residential and commercial tenancy issues from our perspective and others. Ms Crozier has dealt with the health and nurse-patient ratio issues. I just want to touch on some of the justice amendments. This power gives the Attorney-General enormous power. Enormous power. Clause 4 of the bill creates a regulation power where the attorney across all of the justice portfolios can make regulations dealing with virtually every aspect of the justice system. From the courts, the way warrants are issued, family violence intervention orders, the witnessing of documents, conduct of how courts are proceedings that take place in courts, and so it goes on. Now, we recognise that things need to change in this environment, and indeed things have changed. And I pay tribute to our police, people on the front line, the court workers, judges, magistrates, who have all done their best to respond and operate at times remotely and keep the wheels of justice going, because that is absolutely critical for the community, that the wheels of justice keep going. A few issues I have. The power for the regulatory making power, I'll pursue this more fulsomely in committee, and Minister Symes and I have had a discussion about this, but the test for the exercise of that power is a very low threshold. The attorney's opinion, it must be consistent with the health advice of the Chief Medical Officer. It doesn't need to be implement recommendations of the Chief Medical Officer, Health Officer, just consistent with the advice given, etc. We'll pursue that further, but I'll just make the point. The test that the attorney must meet in making meeting this regulation power is a low threshold test, and therefore gives her enormous power. The government's failure to invest in video link technology for our courts is coming home to roost. Magistrates and judges are having to make decisions about which matters to list and which matters to hear, because the capacity in the video link system simply doesn't provide the universal application of that technology at this time, or even to those that need it for urgent matters such as bail, remand, hearings and the like. The fact that that VCAT has not been provided by government with the resources to operate a proper IT system and is still largely reliant on a paper-based system is absolutely regrettable. I pay tribute to the President of VCAT, Her Honour Quigley, for the way she is has tried to manage these issues, and indeed other judicial officers who are heading our courts. But the simple fact is, you can't take a broadly paper-based system and then expect it to operate remotely in a way that is going to keep things going in the way we would all hope. Now, it's interesting as an aside, President, because VCAT can't meet, VCAT is encouraging those with FOI applications to resolve matters themselves. Now Ms Lovell has had a FOI matter in relation to the Shepparton School, and other members of the opposition have had FOI matters. We make offers to the government's legal representations to negotiate a settlement. That offer is ignored. We make offers to the government that, through its legal representations, the matter be determined on the papers. The government denies that. So what does that mean? The government is not being held accountable through the FOI process because it is using the levers at its disposal at VCAT to shut down scrutiny. So all the high, mighty talk from the Premier about, oh, we've got, transparency, absolute nonsense. If the government was interested in transparency, during this period where VCAT can't operate, it would release documents that are the subject of appeal through VCAT, particularly where OVIC has recommended that those documents be released. That should be the starting point. If OVIC has recommended the documents be released, release them. Release them. But no, the government is using this as an opportunity to shut down scrutiny and the mechanism by which that scrutiny can be tested cannot operate. It's an absolute disgrace. President, moving forward, justices of the peace do an amazing job. They are critical to the functioning of our justice system, and we support very strongly volunteers like Justices of the Peace and the work they do. But you know what JPs have had to do in the last little while? They've launched a GoFundMe page for protective equipment. So despite the government ramping up borrowing, looking to draw down on billions of dollars or more, they can't even afford a few $1,000s for some PPE equipment for volunteers in our community to witness documents and fulfil the functions of Justices of the Peace. What an absolute disgrace. What an absolute disgrace. And doesn't that say so much about the government's priorities? As Mr Davis said, President, the move to judge-alone trials, criminal trials in the county and Supreme Courts is appropriate at this time, but should be seen as a temporary measure. The role of juries is very important in our justice system, and any move to abolish them for the long term needs to be carefully reviewed, analysed and thought through. The ability for magistrates to offer to order an offender to be GPS monitored is an appropriate step in this time, and it builds on the work of the Napthine government in introducing GPS technology for offenders in the county and Supreme Courts and for serious violent and post-sentence serious violence and sex offenders during its term in government. The concept of open justice is critical to our justice system. Now, the bill contains clauses that try and encourage open justice. The issue again is our courts are not fully equipped with the technology to enable live streaming from all courts where it's appropriate. So we have a technological issue because of the lack of investment in new technologies. I would encourage the government to provide the courts with the resources and capacity they need to make our courts as open and transparent while making them safe during this difficult time. President, I'm concerned that the use of emergency management days by prisoners will see large cohorts of prisoners receive significant discounts on their prison sentence because for each day of lockdown they'll get a discount of 4. The Corrections Minister has said that that'll be a matter for the Corrections Commissioner. The usual process is where lockdown occurs, the Corrections Commissioner will sign off on up to 4 emergency management days per day. That could see prisoners who are sentenced to 8, 10, 12 months serving a fraction of that time in jail. Finally, in the minute I have left, President, we've seen the corrections and youth justice system riddled with riots and issues under incompetent ministers and an incompetent government. The consequence of that at the moment is there simply isn't the prison capacity to deliver appropriate social distancing that would be available if the government had made those investment decisions at the right time. We're still relying on the Parkville Youth Justice System. The government planned to shut down and because of a lack of money is going to keep open. The Ravenhall prison contracted for 1,000 prisoners, contracted for 1,000 sentenced prisoners, is likely to hold up to 1,600 prisoners in the near future, with up to half of that cohort being remand, therefore less settled prisoners. There are many issues in the justice system that this bill seeks to fix, but you can't fix an underlying problem that hasn't been addressed for years and years. President, thank you.